Good evening. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Could you all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Just a reminder, the exits are in both the back and the front of this library, so if you need to exit for any reason, those are available. First of all, we'd like to adopt an agenda. Could I get a motion? Christina. Second. Bob Presley. All in favor? Thank you. First item on the agenda is the oath of office of newly elected board members. So I'd like to do that. We have 3 among us. We'll start with Gary. Repeat after me. I do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States.
I will support the Constitution of the United States.
And the Constitution of the State of New York.
And the Constitution of the State of New York.
And that I will faithfully discharge. The duties of the office. Of member of the Board of Education. In the Shenendehowa Central School District at Clifton Park. According to the best of my ability. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Welcome back.
Deanna, repeat after me. I do solemnly swear.
I do solemnly swear
That I will support the Constitution of the United States.
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
And the Constitution of the State of New York.
and the Constitution of the State of New York,
And that I will faithfully discharge.
and that I will faithfully discharge
The duties of the office.
the duties of the office
Of member of the Board of Education.
of member of the Board of Education
In the Shenendehowa Central School District at Clifton Park.
in the Shenendehowa School District in Clifton Park,
According to the best of my ability.
according to the best of my ability.
Congratulations. Last but certainly not least,
I do.
I do solemnly swear.
I do solemnly swear
That I will support the Constitution of the United States.
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
And the Constitution of the State of New York.
and the Constitution of the State of New York,
And that I will faithfully
and
discharge.
I will faithfully discharge
The duties of the office.
the duties of the office
Of member of Board of Education.
of member of Board of Education
In the Shenendehowa Central School District at Clifton Park.
in the Shenendehowa Central School District at Clifton Park,
According to the best of my ability.
according to the best of my ability.
Congratulations.
Welcome aboard.
More things change, the more they say the same.
Nice. Okay. Next, we'll go to the election of board officers, with the first one being nominations for board president.
I would like to nominate Bob Presley for Board President.
Any
And I would
second?
like to second that nomination.
Okay. Any other nominations? So we'll take a vote. All in favor? Congratulations.
Thank you.
So I will administer the oath. Probably do that right here. I do solemnly swear
I do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of New York,
and the Constitution of the State of New York,
and that I will faithfully discharge
and that I will faithfully discharge
the duties of the office
the duties of the office
of President of Board of Education
of President of Board of Education
in the Shenendehowa Central School District at Clifton Park,
in the Shenendehowa Central School District in Clifton Park,
according to the best of my ability.
according to the best of my ability.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay. And then I think I can turn that over to you.
Okay.
now. Thanks, Kathy.
Stay here in this chair. Okay. The second board office is for Board Vice President. Can I get a nomination, please? Todd?
I'd like to nominate Deanna for a second term.
Excellent.
I second that.
Christina, second. Any comments, questions, concerns? If not, all in favor? Motion passes unanimously.
Kathy.
Once again, I do solemnly swear
I do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of New York,
and the Constitution of the State of New York,
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties
and I will faithfully discharge the duties
of the office of Vice President of Board of Education
of the office of Vice President of Board of Education
in the Shenendehowa School District at Clifton Park,
in the Shenendehowa School District in Clifton Park,
according to the best of my ability.
according to the best of my ability. Thanks, Kathy, again. Appreciate it.
Kathy.
And then last but not least,
Me too.
I do solemnly swear
I do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of New York,
and the Constitution of the State of New York,
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties
of the position of Superintendent of Schools
of the position of Superintendent of Schools
in the Shenendehowa Central School District at Clifton Park,
in the Shenendehowa Central School District at Clifton Park. You would think I would know that after 15 years.
according to the best of my ability.
According to the best of my abilities.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So I get to keep this position for a bit.
Yep. At this point, we go into Code of Ethics in terms of all board members endorsing. Is this something we would
So
sign?
there is, yes, there is a form that we will have a copy for board members to sign. Ooh, this is not the most recent one.
This is one page. Should I read it, or do I think it's more of an understanding that we've seen this before in terms of the pre-board packet. Are there any thoughts, concerns, comments on our Code of Ethics? This is something we've done every year.
Yep.
So at this point, we would simply sign it individually and move forward. Okay?
Sounds like a plan.
Do you have additional copies of this?
Do we all sign on one form?
Okay.
Or do we all sign on one form?
Oh, that's right.
I'll
Okay.
sign on one.
My mistake. Okay, so, and this is public record that it is our Code of Ethics. I'll sign it and pass it around. Okay.
Like a plan.
Okay. At this point, we'll go to item number 3, Board of Education comments and reports. Opportunity for board members to report, salient updates related to respective committee assignments, although we haven't been on probably many meetings in the interim, and discuss matters from a policy perspective. So, Christine, would you like to start off, please?
Sure. I do not have any updates regarding committees. As you said, Bob, we've been on hiatus for at least a few weeks now. Just one comment, and I know, we try to limit this, but because we all just attended the recent graduation, it's just so wonderful to see all the students that walk across that stage with pride, but also to know that there's many different paths that these students took to get to that point, whether it was a Regents diploma, advanced Regents, Regents with honors, or CDOS, or any of the other certificates that they would receive and qualify to graduate as a Shenendehowa, a proud graduate. So again, it's always an honor to be a part of that. This year was a little special because it was my youngest and last one here at Shen that graduated, but just to see all the families and the supports these kids have is just always amazing. So that's all I have.
I have no comments.
The only thing I wanted to comment on was the fact that, and I'm not quite sure whether everybody gets the legislative summary from advocacy thing from NISBA, but if not, or if you just didn't bother to read it in detail, the only thing I wanted to note was that the one piece of legislation that I took exception to, the one that would have basically given non-instructional, non-professional members of the workforce essentially the same protections as tenure. Very definitely was opposed to that, and apparently there was a strong enough lobby by the various educational groups and others who saw the folly in doing that, so that it didn't go through the complete process. I believe it didn't get out of committee in one house, maybe it got voted on in the other, but anyway, it essentially died. So I'm glad to see that.
Just going to do a light update on the Shenendehowa Education Foundation. Even though Kathy Kalish was here at our last meeting doing an overview of the previous year, we did meet again, and just a few updates. Now, Kathy, I don't remember if she had noted, but Kathy will be moving, we're very sad, from the district and moving closer to her family. And with that, so she was chair, so now the chair we voted that night will be Bill Casey. And I think Kevin Grace is going to help him as vice chair, but don't quote me on that. We're still working that out, I think. But he'll be close enough to a vice chair as we're going to get, probably. And the two students that will sit on that board will be Emily Yin and Cameron Langone will continue to finish his seat on there. And we also discussed that night possibly looking outside of, and how we would do that. There would be a process put in place on looking at students outside of Senate. So it gives other students an opportunity to take a leadership role as well and sit on different boards. So more to come on that. So
First student was who, Mrs. Stevenson?
I'm sorry, Emily Yin.
You have a spelling?
Yes, I do. Yin. Y-I-N.
That's pronounced. Gotcha.
I want to say thank you very much for members of the board for your continued support. And as board president, I see that this is an affirmation both continuity and also our desire to transition other members into leadership roles, and definitely we'll take that on board and take it to heart. I think that we can say we had a very strong year last year. Just a lot of the outcomes that we talked about throughout the year, starting with the goals process that comes forward at a meeting like this. And Oliver will speak to that in the agenda, but it's definitely an affirmation. We've had successively very strong years in terms of focus on education, focus on students, having a very strong foundation financially that allows us to have some flexibility to ensure that we were doing these things while having a very strong organization, not prone to layoffs or organizational drops in terms of courses and things like that. So I look forward to this year coming up to be very much the same and really affirming that what we do every meeting throughout each year makes sense and works for us. So thank you very much, and look forward to continuing to a new year. Thank you.
Thank you.
At this point, we'll go over to public comments and see if there's anybody in the public that would like to speak. It's an opportunity to address the board. If there are any residents in attendance, does not look like we have anybody that wants to speak. We'd like to, in case we do, we'd like to remind residents that public comment is only one item on the long agenda. We're therefore asking each speaker to be succinct and remarks be limited to 2 or 3 minutes. Also expect residents to speak respectful and courteous manner so as to promote proper civility and decorum for students. Residents may also contact the board at email, by email at boa@shannon.org. All questions come in the Office of Public Information Officer and are shared with the board and the superintendent as appropriate. Policy question concerns are typically addressed by the board president. Operational question concerns are typically addressed by superintendent and or designee. So that closes out any public comments from residents or students. Now let's turn over to Dr. Robinson for the superintendent's report.
Certainly, I'll have one comment and then end with recent news occurrence. First of all, we, as Mr. Presley mentioned, we ended the school year on a very high note with 772 students graduating this year. And an interesting point to note, certainly the board is aware of it because I sent you a note in Friday bulletin. We had 14 students who did not graduate. However, we're anticipating that 11 of those 14 will be graduating after August. And the public may not realize that for years we do August graduation. It's not as large as ceremony, but we do actually a ceremony. The kids put on the caps and gowns, and board members and myself and the high school administration attend, and because we want that moment to be special for those students as well, and remind them that when you look at your diploma, it doesn't say June graduate versus August graduate. You're the class of 2019 in this case. So we certainly want to continue to encourage those 11 students, and we know that a couple students will be returning back to finish some things. But all along, when you think about that, it's pretty significant accomplishment of our students, which is a reflection on our faculty, staff, and administration. So certainly kudos to everyone as we go through that process. This time of year is an interesting time for us, and later on you'll hear some processes that we're going through the summertime to make sure that we're ready, hitting the ground come September. If you drive to the campus, and this become part of my morning ritual now, to see what's new, and we discussed several times over the course of the past several months the ongoing construction that we have. In fact, I think the campus roads are scheduled on Moe Road entrance, scheduled to be closed tomorrow. And if you drive to Moe Road now, you see a lot of trees being cut down on one side where we'll create a second lane as you're coming from 146 on Moe and turn into the campus to create a second lane. At some point, there will be expansion on the other side, which is pretty exciting. And we just finished the parking lot here area at High School West, which was another big piece. The new road connection from north to south elementary schools, that connection is happening now to make that intersection at 146 and come on the campus a lot safer. So we're pretty excited to see that piece of it. So the point, and if you go to the high school, tons of work's happening in the high school kitchen to refurbish that area. So a lot of things happening across the district, but the roadways are a little bit more visible, a little bit more prominent. In fact, someone stopped me. I was coming in, I was parked on the side looking, and this couple walking saying, "So what's this happening?" And I'm like, "Well," and I started explaining to him, and and everybody becomes like "Oh yeah, absolutely. I always thought that was a poor intersection. Whoever designed that, this," and I'm like, "Okay." So next person probably talk to probably say this is an awful decision. So let me leave while we run ahead. So it's pretty exciting stuff that's happening. And so kudos to a lot of folks. And I know I see Steve West and Barb Saliker in the back, and yes, well, we have a lot of contractors and Augie and some of those folks are on site to make sure the construction is going. I don't want to lose sight of the fact that we have tons and tons of stuff happening within our buildings to make sure the buildings are up to date. Tons of stuff happening with our fields and other facilities. And so kudos to all our folks who what I call work behind the scene in the summer. So when people come back in September, it's pretty seamless, and no one realized that all the work that actually went to make sure that things are ready for our students. So pretty excited about that. And as much as I'm excited about that, we unfortunately had some bittersweet news today. We're still working on some details and trying to understand how we can better support our students and family. We had an unfortunate passing of a student today. At least we were informed today of an unfortunate passing of a student. So the high school administration have been working with the family to make sure that we provide supports to the family directly, as well as tomorrow we'll have counselors available at High School West to provide additional supports to students who may need it. We know, and I've been contacted by several parents already saying that thank you for it because my child knew this particular student. So we anticipate that we'll have some of that, and our staff is already. In fact, I hear that tonight there might be a congregation of students, student athletes on the field because this young person was an athlete here at Shannon. So just being cognizant of that and trying to be respectful to the family as they go through this moment that no one wants to ever encounter as a parent or otherwise. So just keep the family in your thoughts as you go about your business for the remainder of the day, knowing that it's a difficult time for them and difficult time for our school community as well. So we'll keep you informed as things progress along.
Okay. I think at this point we jump over to information items, starting with the organizational chart review.
So several years back, we made some modifications to our organizational chart to one, illustrate the capacity that we have within the organization and to delineate some roles and responsibilities. And it's more from an administrative lens. So in other words, we don't have all the support staff, that's not the intent. It's talking about the administrative leadership piece of it. And again, if you look at this chart carefully, and just want to blow it up a little bit, if you look at the top of the chart, it talks about our key stakeholders, which are our students. So everything that we do comes back to how we support our students. And as you go to the process, and at the bottom of the chart, myself from the Board of Education. So all the things that we do, you do as a board, all those policies, all those things support all the respective administrators so we can best provide services to our students. So this first one is just a depiction of that to illustrate how organizationally we look at accountability from a standpoint of, at the end of the day, we want to do what's in the best interest of our kids, and these are the various district level administrative positions that's designed to address and support those. Some of the lines are lines of supervision. All the dotted lines are lines of communication. So in other words, there's never an excuse when someone says, I didn't know someone was doing something, because we have a responsibility, the reciprocal responsibility to always be in communication and collaboration with each other as a system. So let's give you some indication of that. The second chart was, selfishly, when I first got to Shen, was trying to figure out a way, how do I structure the organization in a way that we can manage it? In other words, I always say, how do we put our hands around the organization, so to speak? And so trying to create some houses, if you will, using that kind of terminology. And then you have the financial side, the schools, the instructional side, and the management services. And so this gives, again, a delineation of some of the capacity we have. From the finance side, we have everything from business office to facilities. Then you have your secondary school administration, then you have your elementary school administration, and you have all your instructional supports, everything from the role of Dr. Wood and as deputy superintendent to special education and everything in between. So it kind of captures the essence of all the things that we do to support instructional initiatives. On the management services side, we have everything from human resources to public information and everything in between, in terms of how do we ensure that the management of the district as a function is done seamlessly. Related to this gives a great chart that particularly as people, we use this quite a bit for when we orient new administrators to the system, to say, who do I call if something comes up? And actually, this is available to everyone, by the way, but we particularly use this in administration onboarding processes. And so again, not to go through all of them. So for instance, under Mrs. Chase, you have some of the primary functionalities. So somebody comes and says, who's in charge of that? You kind of see those broad headings. To Mrs. Carmen on this side, it talks about who's in charge of DASA? Who's in charge when we get subpoenas? And this comes up all the time. Things that don't happen too often, but somebody needs to know, who's that person do I contact first? So this chart does some of those kind of things. To even down here, you see Barb Saliker. Who's in charge of school safety and security? So that's one of those kind of things. So that's the point of contact to go with that. Or Rebecca Hall. Who's the person that actually signs the check in the school district? So some question that oftentimes is not something that's readily available, but this chart provides that information so people can certainly start in the right direction when they have respective questions. This chart then goes down to the building level and talk about the capacity that we have in the building level, from professional development, all the folks that's doing professional development, charged with professional development in the system, and some of the bigger rocks that they try to address in professional development, to when you start looking at academic administrators, all the respective academic administrators by name, and then again, some of the bigger rocks that they address by this. Similar, when you have the building, you have your building principals, your class assistant principals and associates. So everyone kind of, again, a sense of, and some of the larger roles. And I just want to point one thing out on this. There are a lot of overlap between these roles and responsibilities. But there are certain things that are some unique functions. For instance, we have parent communications here, and we also have parent communications here. And if you know, I deliberately changed the words, parent communications and parental communication, because it's always a method to the madness, so to speak. So when we look at this is where over here is when it's more academically oriented questions that people have. My child is struggling with this, and I need to talk to someone about that. Versus over here is, okay, it's not academic, it could be behavioral, it could be other things that I need to address with my child. So we want to make sure that, one, people understand that at the end of the day, someone's going to address the respective parent needs. But who is the best person to start a conversation with? So we're not bouncing people around through 5 people before they finally get to someone to get a legitimate answer. Or someone say, well, that's not my responsibility. Well, it's all of our responsibility. So I just kind of to point those out, and we try to delineate some of the big rocks. And again, every year we kind of look at these, fine-tune some roles and responsibilities, but you see a lot of overlap across the board with a lot of these things as we move forward. So our organizational chart isn't your traditional organizational chart, because it's not designed to be your traditional organizational chart. It's designed to talk about the capacity that we have, and certainly we update it to include some of the new folks that's coming on board. You have Todd Jagney here, Malik Jones in the elementary sequence. So some of the new board people are on board. You have Stacy Vadney here and Jacqueline McCoskey here from on the cabinet and associate side. So we updated to have those new individuals in the sequence. We're working on, as the board knows, through the budget process, we have a special education piece that's out there that we're really trying to look at, how we look at our CPSE process, our preschool special education process, some of our outplacement services, because we have more and more complex needs. And so how do we make sure that we're addressing those things, and we have the capacity to effectively manage that? And we're still working through this, and we anticipate by the end of the summer we'll have a design and then start looking at hiring at some point. So again, it's one of those kind of things we just don't want to rush to do because we have capacity versus really assess what we're doing and make sure once we feel that it's something that's going to add value to the organization as we move forward. So again, for the board purposes, we do this every year and ask the board to approve it as a formality, saying that, yes, we support the structure that we have in place to drive the process and progress and change within the school district. So I'll stop there. Any questions you may have.
One thing I've seen that just came to my mind, the 9 to 12 counseling that is covered by Mrs.
Yes,
Drago?
yes.
Okay.
So that's going to be a new shift, if I'm not mistaken. So the counseling, we have had associate principal address it. So in the high school, used to be Paul Ripchick as a part of his associate principal role, and Mr. Ripchick retired, and so Mr. Gustanoni going through his leadership team trying to figure out what's the best marriage of people, personality, skills, experiences, other responsibilities, so we could have a very comprehensive approach to those kind of things. So Mr. Drago will be taking on the counseling pieces. It's not necessarily here, maybe before I start looking at, but one of the things, Mrs. Carmen, since we're talking about counseling, Mrs. Carmen does the K-12 counseling here. Mm-hmm. So there's the complementary pieces, and we try to have a broad, systematic approach so we can have 2 people. So it's, in other words, we don't want to have 5 or 6 people doing it. We want to minimize the number of people so we can have a much more aligned approach to, in this case, counseling from a K-12 perspective. So, good?
I'm good. Any other questions?
So another piece that I want to share with the board in a very straightforward way, we every summer we have 2 days with the entire leadership team, meaning all administrators, supervisors, directors, and we get together to, the first day was the Friday after graduation. So think about that. We had graduation, everybody's excited, want to go into a long weekend. Nope, week's not done yet. We still have Friday. And so Friday we had a great, actually, a very powerful session, and we tried to do some off-site. So the off-site for us was going to Hilton Garden, and powerful session. A lot of it was professional development in the beginning, and then we started the goals process. Then we have a session. The second day session will be on the 18th, and we're going to go to Riverstone Manor, which is in Scotia, again, a little off-site place to kind of create a retreat environment. And so that's when we're really going to dig deep into the goals process. And so I wanted to share, because at some point the goals are going to come back to the board, so the board could formally adopt the goals, the district goals. But with the goals, there are certain components that actually makes this whole process work. And so I just want to walk through this briefly so the board can have appreciation, the public can have appreciation. You have seen some of this before because it's the same theme that drove our budget. The whole future present theme that drove our budget for 1920 is the same theme that's driving our budget, our goals for 1920 as well. So you have seen this, and you've seen this. This is a very theme that, again, how do we, because everything the same way our budget supports our mission, our goals supports our mission. So again, we kind of go through this process to make sure that our goals are focused on those particular, the 5 areas outlined here as we move forward, and you've seen this as well. So we want to keep saying that because the continuous conversation is important. And so we're being very focused and very deliberate in what we're doing in all the different fronts, because we can't say the budget is about this and the goal is about this, because it's not going to work. We need to have this very overlapping sequence of events taking place, even though they're happening at different times. And so when this is a great graph that look at the end of the day, we're building goals for success for all students. So we build that with the end in mind. similar to the organizational chart with the key stakeholders, our students, success for all students, where we build the goals, and then we start looking at what's the mission of the district, then we create these essential objectives. So these essential objectives is that if we do these things well, we're working to satisfy the mission. So every year we want to do different things to add value to the organization with the mission in mind. So the essential objectives is some of the things that we typically change from year to year, and these essential objectives then drive what are the program level. What I mean by program level: elementary, middle school, high school level, district level, program level. What are those program level outcomes that we want in order to satisfy the essential objectives? So it kind of goes from large to smaller, so, or should I say, from a broad view to a narrow view to a much more surgical view as we go through the process. Oops. And so then we get into the individual piece. So then what are we doing as individual leaders? Those principal take it to teachers. What are you doing as an individual teacher in your domain or whomever just to help build towards the mission piece of it? And the big part of it is that we also driven by the whole notion of equity and outcomes. And so in other words, as the budget process will develop the same way with service following need, we want to make sure that our goals are comprehensive and all-inclusive as we're looking and think about all the respective needs of kids. So we go through this process this is kind of more of an intellectual process. So these are the goals. The goal statement that the board adopted last year haven't changed. So for the board's piece, it's an easy process because it's similar goals. But what we do every year, and I spend a lot of time looking at this, we look at the mid-year reports that you have seen. I look at a lot of year-end data that we collect from administrators, and then kind of come up and say, okay, how do we shift some of the focus by some of the essential objectives that we put in place, but not a significant shift in terms of we throwing out the baby with the bathwater versus how do we make some complementary changes as we move forward. So essential objectives, we'll get an example of this one. We modified that now each goal area has only 3. Last year we had 5 on the some, 4 on the others, and it felt not as smooth, to be quite frank with you. So every year we kind of look back and say, we need to refine this a little bit more. So the essential objectives, again, you'll see some common themes and terms that you as a board should know. That one of the objectives focus on the profile of Shannon students. How do we make sure that profile and those qualities are being addressed through various actions and should I say, are even driving actions? And the profile of engaged classroom, all things that you have heard as a board, how do we ensure that those things are serving as a guidepost for actions within our classrooms and that culturally responsive framework. So again, it's broad enough, but not so broad that it's watered down, but broad enough that people realize that there's a lot of ways people can contribute to this, but it's not so specific that it's only certain people contributing to it. So there's always a fine balance between all these essential objectives. Again, I won't go into all of them in details, but this essential objective talk about the student experience. And so the student experience is looking at the student experience through an equity lens. And equity lens is, so it doesn't matter. You pick or experience for kids, and we have to ask ourselves, is that truly an experience for any kid? Mrs. Stevenson spoke about the Shen Foundation, looking at process, and do we have a process that's open that only kids can do certain things, so only kids will hear, versus we have a process that is pretty open, that if a child wants to have a particular experience, we try to see if we can support those experiences as much as possible. So this equity lens become a big piece of it as we move forward. The third objective is when we start looking at, I hate this thing when it does this, when we start looking at the next gen learning standards. And so that's a big thing that's coming down the pike. Those standards are real right now. So we're dealing with science standards right now. And so we need to make sure that that's a salient part of our process, that because we call us arrogant as a system, but our job is not to meet the mandates. Our job is to try to exceed the mandates all the time. And so we look at that from that standpoint. Are we implementing with fidelity? So again, these drive goals. So the essential objectives, and say, Bob, you need to do this, or Deanna, you need to do that. It's saying these are the bigger picture, and then what are you doing from a program level to address that? What are you doing from an individual level to address that? And so we build a capacity out by adding more people to the conversation. Similar when we have the organizational culture one, the culture and the vision. So this is a big one that we talk about. Then we want to make sure that the expectation, norms, and actions are defined by this very inclusive environment where every student feels connected. And so that's important. That's important that, and if we don't pronounce it as our essential objective, it could feel optional. And so we're pronouncing it. We want to have every kid feel connected to this. And so everything from multilinguistic communications to you name it under the sun. We want every kid to feel connected some way to the school. And the comprehensive network of wellness and health has been an ongoing piece for us. Again, we flipped it around because we want to put what we want is the comprehensive network. How we do it could happen in many different ways. And this is a term I kind of made up, and I probably should have put parentheses around it because I'm sure that some Webster Dictionary person out there is saying that word doesn't exist. But I want to take the stress off the system and kids within the system. How do we de-stress it and not having the whole experience being this ridiculously stressful experience for kids as they're going through the experience? Because we know that's not a healthy experience for kids. They'll tolerate it, they'll survive it, but we don't want kids to tolerate and survive school. We want kids to thrive in the school environment. And then the third one here is looking at the district's comprehensive safety plan. And school safety, as you know, goes across the whole gamut. And so a big part of that, not only process and structure we have in place, but also how do we ensure that employees and students alike are familiar with it, comfortable with, know what they need to do. What role do they play in an unfortunate, if we have a safety situation, how they carry those roles out. So they kind of go through those essential objectives, the personnel and professionalism, the recruitment and hiring piece is a big part of it in terms of how do we foster a very comprehensive organization that focuses on diversity from the far sense of inclusive race, ethnicity, as well as varied experiences. We want to be an organization that people don't think this is a closed shop, no need apply. And you'll be surprised how sometimes those messages can easily be conveyed. So since the negative message can be conveyed easily, we want to ensure we convey the very positive message on the other side as well. The profile of a Shannon employee is a great document that we want to be alive all the time, and that drives and guide employee actions similar to a professional learning environment. We want it to be very relevant, very collaborative, very progressive. And the beautiful thing about this is not only the leadership team, it's not only our instruction staff, it's also about our support staff. How do we ensure that all segments of our employee groups realize that there's a professional responsibility for them, and we're investing in their professionalism to make them better professionals. So that goes try to capture all that in simplistic but yet comprehensive enough statement. Again, I'm just going to walk through these quickly if there's a question you have. And then the last goal area we have is fiscal responsibility. Remember, we changed the names because before we used to have budget, and every time people thought budget, they thought it was Mrs. Chase's responsibility. Well, she's the chief financial officer, but ironically, she doesn't spend any of the money. It's everyone else that's spending the money. So how do we foster a sense of fiscal responsibility across the organization as well? And I have no idea what just happened here. And so, okay, Kelly, what happened to me? Yeah, Kelly bounced me out. She was telling me I was talking too much, so she deliberately did that from the back. She was like, okay, let me cut him off because he's going way too longer than I anticipated. So I'll just go to the last slide real quick. So truly, it's the last slide in this sequence. And so the professional responsibility one, fiscal responsibility, we talk about resource allocation being equitably distributed, and that's a big piece. So and I just want to emphasize that point a little bit with the board, that equitable distribution piece. Right now, not only is a law that we have to go back and look at our budgets and make sure that we have an equitable distribution of resources, but it's our imperative, it's our moral imperative that we can't have certain, because kids go to certain schools, they have certain advantages. We can't. We need to be able to say that we have parity not only in performance, but we have parity in options and opportunities for kids. And so we're looking at that. We're looking at that and even looking at it much more carefully than I would say in the past, to really look at it and saying, okay, what are some of the things that we're doing? What are some of the hiccups that as a result of some things that we didn't anticipate it was going to have that much of an impact? And now that we know, we learn from, we're moving forward. So it's a composition of schools, it's a composition of needs, it's all these factors that we have taken in consideration when we look at the equitable distribution of revenue. And this is a key one because, as I said, we have a legal piece of it, and the legal piece has really forced us to analyze data a lot closer than we have in the past and ask ourselves the question if that's going to be the case as well, and the operational support services and the budgeting piece. So these are the essential objectives that we have modified, and personally I've modified, spent a lot of time to make sure that as we're we're working smarter to be much more effective as a system. Mr. Delano.
When they were first talking about the equitable distribution of resources, it looked like they were going to focus on the amount of money spent per pupil from building to building, and so forth, which would have been really a bad thing.
Yeah.
So from what you're telling me, it is either we have the latitude to do it right, or they've got it right.
So they didn't get it right.
They didn't.
The state,
Okay.
so nothing against people for the state. They didn't get it right, but what happened, they provided enough flexibility, so we think. So once we start looking at some of those things, either we can be able to explain. For instance, if you have a building that has 3 or 4 high-intense programs in it, and you do per pupil cost, that building per pupil cost might be off the roof in comparison to another building. But it's not because, it's just because those 2 or 3 programs skew the results. And so you have to be able to say, okay, what's the outlier factor, and explain the outlier, and then try to take out those outliers. So when we look at it, we're saying, what are things that are unique to buildings versus district level programs that happen to be housed in a particular building? And I'll give you a perfect example. So we have, Tasago going to have the 2 MOVE programs next year. We have Oranjan has the BEDS program. And so how do we try to look at those kind of things, take those out of the factors, outliers, and say, taking those out of the equation, what does that mean? However, we're not discounting the fact that those programs in those buildings have impacts. They may not necessarily be directly financial impact that we can quantify in a formula, but they have other impact on the building. So from a documentation purpose, we look at the outliers. From our processing purposes, we say, okay, we know that the outliers exist, and we can say these are outliers. However, what's the other impact that they have in the buildings that we need to try to compensate for? And so so it's kind of a twofold or 2-pronged approach to this whole equitable distribution piece.
If you don't mind, one follow-up question. I know that one of the things that caused inequitable distribution in a lot of districts was that schools that had been poor performing were schools that more experienced teachers tended to want to leave. Consequently, the more experienced teachers tended to focus, to wind up in certain buildings, and of course those buildings were more money was being spent because the faculty was more expensive. To my knowledge, our schools are relatively equitable in terms of, performance. Do we find that there's any tendency for faculty to try to be in one place as
No,
opposed to
I would say no, because when we look at the scattergram of employees, teacher in this case, talking about teacher and employees, you see a fairly equal distribution across the steps, 1 through 24 of people. So we don't have a situation where we have a large number of people on the higher steps and a small number. So as a result of that, you also then see a similar distribution across the buildings. Not to say that you have, but nothing that's what I call causing that skewing effect. Mm-hmm. However, and we're very cognizant of that if we had a situation where, because we have enough churn, if you will, in all our buildings all the time, and so the dynamics are very comparable from building to building, but that's certainly one of those things that if we had that, we have to explain, well, the reason why this building versus this building, because this building has 50 staff at step 25, and this building has 50 staff at step 5. So naturally, this building is going to cost more, but just because it costs more, it doesn't mean it's better. Because we can't imply just because someone's been doing something longer, they're doing it any better than someone who's not. So it's not a quality assessment, it's just a financial assessment. And so that's why I said they didn't get it right, but they weren't so prescriptive. At least we'll find out once we submit our first report, if they kick it back, that we can't provide explanation. But the bigger part of it is it's a conversation with the public. And I think because we have these conversations all the time, any conversation we have with the public is going to be consistent with what we've been saying the whole time, that at the end of the day, we want kids, regardless of whatever school they are, to have a comparable quality experience. It won't be the same, but a comparable quality experience, and not having good schools versus bad schools. And our data shows we don't have those skews across the board. We want all schools to be better, and not necessarily trying to do one school because it's in trouble, so to speak. Does that make some sense? Mr. Stevens, you good?
I'm good.
So that's the goals process. So we'll be going through that quite a bit over the course of the coming weeks here, and in August, we'll come back with a board with some more details on some of the program level initiatives. But in August, the board is going to be asked to approve the goals, those 4 goals. But I think it's important, and I think it is important for the board to understand the process that we use to drive program level and individual leadership actions. And so when people go out and leave and start to do the job, there's a sense that we all march into the same beat as we move forward. So pretty excited about that process as well.
Just some comments from me. What's very noticeable this time, there's less of what I call top-down influencers, such as state education and APPR integration, bringing forward technology. So whatever moves we've made with technology, we've done these over the years, they're done. That's just part of what goes on here. And therefore, they're not in there. That means there's more time to focus on the basics of educational improvement, the basis of being a stronger organization, all the things that are more clearly laid out and not impacted by these outside influences. I also noticed the term de-stress is a very healthy sign. And it to me, it's more of a very basic, grounded message that, school should not be an environment that amps up the stress in our students' lives. They've got quite a few things around them, but we're going to be a school that removes as much as we can as possible. And the other part is a lot of inclusivity in here. And I think those are all good, positive things that we're bringing forward in the district that we look forward to progressing throughout the year.
Pretty excited as we move forward.
I just want to say one more thing too. We talk about this when we sit around the board table too, and I just want to say thank you because I know Bob brings it up, and you take this very seriously. And some of the things that we've talked about, you've actually started to migrate into this discussion. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and I'm glad you pointed out because that is one of the documents that's also drive the thinking when, as a part of the board evaluation of me, and they say, what are some things doing well? Here's some things we want to focus on. And so for me, it has to blend. It has to be seamless, right? Because if something is just out there, yeah, we may address it, or, oh, yeah, before the year, let's address that. Then become an appeasement. And we never want to do anything for an appeasement versus it has to be part of the fabric. And how does it fit into the fabric of what we do so we do it well and become institutionalized? Back to your piece. And so every year certain things may not show up anymore, but it's not that we're doing it because those things are institutionalized. Integration of technology is institutionalized in our system. And so the question is, we just want to keep fine-tuning and change the technology, but that's institutionalized in our system. And so every time we want to do those kind of things, but thank you for pointing it out and noticing that, because that's so for me to you as a board, I want to make sure that what you said to me certainly is a priority in the many things that we do, because all those things are complementary. So thank you. You just want me to walk through that, because people aren't going to take action now. The liaison, talk about how this is structured real quick, Bob?
Sure. Go ahead.
So one of the documents that we put together for the board, and again, people sometimes don't realize that this board is a very involved board. It's just not Tuesday night board meetings. And a large part of that responsibility is liaison responsibilities. So the chart you have here, and Mr. Presley as president will follow with board members and say, do you want to continue some liaison role? If you don't, let us know. And some part we modify the chart. But just want to walk through. So these are the partnership team assignments. I didn't change who's what, and if something is wrong, chalk it up to the head and not to the heart. But just to kind of show people that we have different board members assigned to different buildings from the partnership team pieces, and we try to get some sense of what time. Some of the times may change, but some people may say, well, I can only do mornings, I can't do afternoons, but it's kind of gives some sense of it. So I still have to confirm some of the times that it's still going to be the same. So that's the first piece I just want to briefly show the board. The second piece is that we have a lot of very active and comprehensive committees in the school district. And so when you look at this, we have, for instance, the Audit Committee that Mrs. Hoffman currently sits on the Audit Committee. I got to make it smaller, sorry. So we have the Audit Committee it's a legal mandate that the district has an Audit Committee. But so this document, it kind of gives you the charge, a description of what it's about. And it's a great document even for board members to see what the charge of other committees are, even if you're not serving on something, because sometimes you're like, hey, I wonder if we're doing anything with that. Well, we actually do have a committee that addressed that. And so back to the board reports that we were talking about. So the board members who serving on these things will come back and say, hey, here's some key points from the audit committee, some key actions that we have taken to keep other board members informed, to keep the public informed of these things. But again, I'm not going to go through each one of them, but it gives you some sense of from audit committee to character education. We have the presentations that Mrs. Carmen come in at board meetings to our CSCA labor management. We have a committee that's more of an internal HR type committee that we have. To district data team, we have a district data team committee. Seems like it's losing power, right? That's me. To district data team committee, again, that's more of an internal process in one. We have the DIDIC committee. We have board members serve on the DIDIC committee, 2 board members in this instance. The district partnership team. So we have a team that brings in all the building level partnership teams and talks about those kind of things. The SAFE committee. This is a pretty important one. Mrs. Carmen and Mrs. Chase oversee the SAFE committee. It's our safety committee. And so we have a wide cross section of people and first responders on this particular committee to talk about school safety. We have our diversity committee, the district-wide diversity committee. So again, these are all the respective. This is a redistricting one that is an ad hoc that we at some point will get into much more. Once we get into that, this is one of those we have when we need it. It's not a standing committee, it's an ad hoc committee. Enrichment, acceleration, environment. So again, you have the document in front of you, but the point is that all the big rocks that you see pop up in goals, we also use committees to make sure that we're getting stakeholder feedback, input into some of the decisions that we're making, and so therefore make the organization very vibrant. So at some point, I'll be asking the board president to canvass board members to see if people want to continue to serve in the roles. The policy review is a key committee, obviously, to the board because that's where we make policies or develop policies for the board. And so that's what this document is truly about. This is where the work happens across the district that sometimes people don't see what's behind the scenes. So again, it's one of those documents to share. I don't know if, Bob, you're going to talk about the process, how you want to try to canvass folks to get feedback.
Yeah, what I'd like to do is between now and the meeting scheduled for August 13th, to solicit board members. Some of my personal sentiments is that we have an opportunity to ensure more continuity and not make a lot of changes. Other years we may have some new board members and that's the opportunity to make changes. So we went through that last year, but we'd like to hear your thoughts one-on-one through emails. If you want to, let's say, due to timing and convenience, maybe switch out or the opportunity to do something new and different. The other thing I've heard from other board members is, in some cases, like the policy committee, some board members would like to sit in on it just to observe how that works. So I think we could, this upcoming year, provide opportunities for board members to just sit in and observe a committee that they haven't participated in to further their professional development. The other thing we're going to do this year is the practice that on the second meeting of the month, there will also be time for Board of Education comments pertaining to what you've done on a committee or liaison assignment. I think that's something we want to emphasize. We tried that last meeting. I think that overall worked. I think there's some time to kind of streamline discussions as we get better, because it is something where you really want to, in that mode, just present a broad what's really new, what's different, and then allow the presentations that come throughout the year to bring that forward. You're kind of like a sports broadcaster, just showing the above the weight top type things, and that's one thing we'll try to emphasize this upcoming year as well. Any other comments or questions? Okay.
Mrs. Carmen? Emergency response plan. That's one of the policies.
Okay, we'll turn over to Mrs. Carmen on first readings that include the emergency response plan.
Good evening. So tonight we're presenting the district-wide emergency response plan as required by law, must be reviewed and updated on a yearly basis, being presented tonight for first reading and approved for August. In addition, we have a few other, not many.
Before you go into that just a specific comment, and for the record, the plan sits for 30 days before the board approves it, and during that 30-day period, it'll be out there, and certainly if the public wants to review it, offer comments, we welcome that, because it's also part of the regulation. If you remember last year, there was a write-up saying that Shannon is not complying with safety regulations. It's because we technically, at a board meeting, did not announce that our safety plan sits between first reading and second reading for 30 days. When in reality, our entire process for all policies, there's almost every case a 30-day window between it. But since we technically did not announce that, and so I'm making sure I technically announce that it's there, public can certainly offer comments on it, and 30 days from now, at the board meeting, we will bring it back forward in August, and the board will be asked to take second action on it.
Thank you. In addition, there's a couple other, excuse me, policies, not many, that we're putting forth for first reading as well.
And my understanding on the ones that are the other policy items here, these weren't scheduled in advance. These came from
Correct.
state direction.
Both of these changes that you see here regarding foster care and child abuse and maltreatment were not scheduled. However, due to a change in the law, we needed to make some updates to our policy and regulation. Any questions?
Okay. Thank you very much. Let's move on to consent items. Treasurer's report and minutes. Can I have a motion on treasurer's report? So Mrs. Stevenson, second, Mr. Gilbert. Any comments, questions? All in favor on the treasurer's report? Okay, all five. Minutes, I think we're going to have to go separate here because we had different attendance levels. So the June 11th meeting, I was not at that meeting, so I will abstain.
So was that not?
Okay.
Do we have
No motion from Mrs.
Oh, we
Stevens?
don't have enough to pass that.
Wait,
Yeah.
Wow.
What do you mean? Oh,
Oh,
that's right,
that's
because
right.
can't vote.
Oh, yeah.
So that we're putting it back on the next agenda?
Yep.
Okay. And then the June 18th, which was an executive session and followed by retreat. I think Todd was not there, but all the others, everybody else was. So that is capable. Can I get a motion on the June 18th? Mrs. Stevenson, second. Mrs. Rajat, any comments, questions? All in favor?
So 4 yes,
Four.
4 abstention?
Correct. And then the June 25th meeting, motion on June 25th. Mr. Rajat, second. Mr. Delalo, any comments, questions?
I was absent. That was that family issue. So
Okay.
I was on that.
So all in favor? Okay, that passed. Let's go to action items. Quite a bit here because this is a reorganizational meeting. So can I get a motion to combine A and B? Mrs. Stevenson, second. Mr. Gilbert, any comments, questions on this? Not? All in favor? 5 voted. And then how about C and D combined? Is there very much financial and accountability to bonding and cash funds? Motion on this one, Mrs. Rajat, second, Mr. Gilbert. Any comments, questions? If not, all in favor? And then item E, I think this is, I think we combine this with E and F. And this one is very important. A lot of times people ask questions about our fee schedule. That's where people are using the buildings. And we do have, if you look closely at it, 2 tiers. One, because in some cases we have folks that are not members of the district who pay a higher amount. And so I think that's interesting to point out. We do get questions on that. So can I have a motion to combine E and F? Mr. Delalo, Mrs. Stevenson, any thoughts, comments, questions? If not, all in favor? Okay. And let's go to items G and H involving purchasing and bids. One is installment purchase from Capital Region BOCES and bids for middle school and elementary science supplies and ice cream and beverages and other commodities. Can I get a motion on G and H? Mr. Gilbert, second, Mr. Rajat. Any comments, questions? If not, all in favor? And then I and J, we'll combine that because they're all contract related. One is for an EAP provided Deer Oaks and contracts listed below. Can I have a motion combining I and G, please? Mrs. Stevenson, second, Mrs. Rajat. Any questions? If not, all in favor? And let's go to K&L involving meal price increases as well as our policy on free and reduced prices for meals. Can I have a motion to combine K&L? Mrs. Rajat, second. Mrs. Stevenson, any questions? If not, all in favor? And we want to recognize separately scholarships and grant donations. Can I have a motion on M? Mr. Gilbert, second. Mrs. Rajat, any comments, questions? Okay, with gratitude on this one, all in favor? And N is separate, that is a secret resolution where we classify what type of environmental impact is coming from an action we're taking. So can I have a motion on N? Secret, Mrs. Stevenson first, second Mrs. Rajat. Any questions? All in favor? And we'll combine O and P, combining district cell phone and credit card use. Can I have a motion on O and P? Mr. DeLallo, second Mr. Gilbert. Any comments, questions? Not? All in favor? All right. So let's go to special education placements and Mrs. Mylove. Mr. Gilbert? Oh,
He made a motion.
I jumped the gun.
oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Good evening. I have for you the recommendations from the Committee on Preschool and School Age Special Education for the end of this year and additionally for next year.
Busy, busy.
Okay, can I have a motion on the special education placements? Mr. Gilbert, second Mrs. Rajat. Any questions? If not, all in favor? And we have staffing recommendations from Mrs. Bush and approval of the org chart. We'll work both of these separately, please. So any comments on the staffing?
We have one of our new teachers in the audience, Lindsay Hunter, is going to be joining the staff at Scano for special ed and AIS. Lindsay, just want to stand up quick as we recommend you to join us.
Okay.
Welcome.
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 Yeah, welcome aboard.
All right. Can I have a motion on approving the staffing recommendations? Motion, Mrs. Stevenson, second, Mr. Rajat. Any comments, questions? If not, all in favor? And let's go to the org chart, which we saw. Any further questions? Any motion? Mr. Gilbert, second motion. Mrs. Rajat, all in favor? All right. Let's go to second reading policies.
Any questions regarding the second reading? One of the biggest things that I do want to point out again, as I had pointed out previously, is that a lot of these policies now incorporate the vaping component, especially what some of the high school students had asked for.
I'd just like to make a comment on that. I think one of the things we saw last year was just the level of communication and empathy from our high school administrators, Mr. Agustinoni and his team, to work with the students on taking a proactive approach, working as leaders to come up with a way that works for everybody. I think that exemplified one of the things we want to do as a district and want to continue. It was not something that came from the board, but really what we saw is the natural leaders within our organization step forward, students, principals, teachers, and I think came up with something that is a very workable way to proceed. So thank you very much. Motion on second reading, Mrs. Stevenson, second Mr. Gilbert. Any comments? If not, all in favor? All right, moving to item 9, public comments. Anybody in the public that wants to resume some public comments? I don't see anybody there. Before we go to item 10, just a quick review of upcoming meetings. August 13th will be a regularly first meeting of the month. Business meeting, 27th will be our 2-hour board retreat, followed by a study session at 7.
So Bob, on the 13th, I am on vacation, but depending on the agenda, if I need to be available, I can do the remote thing with Ken again, if necessary.
Okay, we'll keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Anybody else for those meetings? If not, can I get a motion to adjourn? Mr. Gilbert first, Mrs. Stevenson second. All in favor? Okay, meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Wait a minute.
Nice.
Yeah.
Your phone was moving.
Just enough.
Yeah, perfect. We got a lot done.
How are we picking up?
Do we have, is the list for the board meetings yet?
2 years ago,
I didn't see it on the
all of these
I checked.
once.
This should, but we have it, but I'm not sure we published it. I'll make sure.
If you don't mind, just send it to me. I just want to know, like, how-
Yeah, I'll do that.
You're trying to learn how to curse.
I got up to the
Press
10
some
because I
that,
found it on the agenda, but I didn't see it. on the-
Yeah, no problem. I'll do that.
Oh, you got everybody to press it.
Move that along.
Yeah, you know,
All righty.
good attitude, good approach. You know, we're very efficient.
Yep. Yep. Looking forward to that, Bob.
Same here.
Hey, Bob. I know we talked
Nice
about
job.